Welcome to the PaleyFest Fall TV Preview. I'm Kate Hahn, senior writer for TV Guide magazine, and I am delighted to be your host for this special conversation celebrating Starz' highly anticipated series, The Serpent Queen. And thanks to Citi, the festival's official card and official sponsor, for their help in making this program possible. Today, we are thrilled to welcome members of the series' gifted cast and creative team. Joining us are Samantha Morton, who plays Catherine de Medici, Ludivine Sagnier, who plays Diane de Poitiers, Liv Hill, who plays young Catherine de Medici, Erwin Stoff, executive producer, and Justin Haythe, executive producer and creator. Welcome to everyone watching. Let's start our program. Samantha Morton, the Serpent Queen. Catherine de Medici is an orphan in Italy, and she's married off by her uncle Clement, the Pope, played by Charles Dance, and must go to the French court. Now, it seems to me that's a snake pit that turns her into a serpent. What's your take on how going to France changes Catherine?
I think not only going to France, I think just everything that happens to Catherine really makes her who she is. You know, that's the bones of it. It's everything from being an orphan to what she witnesses in the convent, her education there, the learning of different languages, mathematics, astrology, and also being surrounded by intelligent women in the convent. You know, there's in our show, you see a little bit of that, but you don't see, obviously there's the audiobook that, I've listened to. I didn't read the book, I was listening to it, I'm a bit lazy, but there's a lot of stuff about her that we don't always see that is absolutely fascinating, that formulated, I don't know for Liv, but certainly formulated how Catherine then behaves when she arrives in France. Not being considered beautiful, but knowing that she's got brains and she's often the cleverest person in the room, and how to play that game of chess, being ahead of everybody else, really.
Well, it's certainly fun to watch, and I love that we get the mature Catherine played by Samantha, and then we also get the younger Catherine played by Liv Hill, I think in the first 3 or 4 episodes. So, Liv, we were talking earlier, there's a scene where your uncle, says, well, I wish you were as pretty as your mother. And she quietly spits in his wine without him knowing. So clearly she has some spark from the very beginning. What's your take on her and playing the younger version?
I think it's exactly as Samantha said. From a young age, she's been emotionally and physically abused her whole life, belittled. She's been degraded by mostly men around her. And I think because of that, she is always in a state of survival. And that's how I approached the young Catherine, always alert, always watchful, always ready to do what she has to do to secure her place. And so when she does arrive in the French court, where, it's quite brutal and unforgiving, I don't think it's that big of a shock to her. I think she's been used to it, and as Samantha said, I think it's her intelligence and her sheer resilience that is actually what sets her apart from everyone else. It's quite remarkable to me that she manages to maintain some sort of self-esteem and self-worth despite everything she's up against.
Well, and she does say, I made the mistake of falling in love with the person with whom I had an arranged marriage, and she does fall in love with Henry. But there's a little bit of a problem. Ludivine, you play Diane, who is the mistress to Henry, and they've definitely formed an interesting love triangle. Can you talk about your character?
Yes, absolutely. Actually, Diane was not supposed to be Henry's lover. She started as his governess, because Henry's mom died very young. So she was the governess, and they fell in love. And when Catherine arrived at the court, the love story between the two of them has already started. So I think she's deeply in love with Henry, and she's also deeply attracted to power, not in a bad way, but in those times, if you were a woman, you had absolutely no rights. So the more power you had, the more chances you had to survive. And she's a very good, I think Diane is a very good gamer. She knows her influence at the court, and she takes young Catherine in, and she managed to manipulate her to a certain point, because as you both said, Catherine is so smart and brilliant that she won't fall into all Diane's traps. But the relationship is very nuanced, because it's not only an antagonism. There are many similarities between the two characters, because they both have to elbow their way in a very male environment. So somehow they will have to stick together and help each other.
Right, and that takes a lot of interesting twists and turns. Justin, Haythe, was that what was so interesting to you? This is based on a book. Maybe you could talk about why that book spoke to you. And was it let's see what women during this time period did? We don't hear a lot about female history from this time period.
Well, I certainly wasn't looking for that. And I wasn't looking to do a period show or a royal show. But when I read the book, I thought that that this was a unique anti-hero. I couldn't think of a female anti-hero. I thought that she was brilliant. I thought she was incredibly relatable. I thought she was incredibly sympathetic. And part of the challenge of adapting it was that I don't think you can understand Catherine's story without seeing her very young, and see how young she was to be plucked out of that life and dropped in France, and to have to consummate her marriage in front of a room full of strangers, to find one friend, her cousin, who turns out to in fact be her, the opposite of a friend. And then also to see the other end of Catherine's life, to see she had 10 children and was only outlived by one, which seems like a tragic fairy tale curse. But to see how many people she outmaneuvered, how she continued to play this game. So you needed a breadth of life. And so you needed two actors to do it. And we were lucky enough to have two brilliant actors who worked so well together and with such courage together. Because, Liv and Sam didn't, if you speak for you guys, but didn't sort of conspire to make one portrait. They really sort of orbited each other. And I think it's amazing how well it works, this dialogue between older Catherine and younger Catherine. It does become a kind of dialogue between them. So what I primarily wanted to do was an anti-hero, not necessarily a female anti-hero, but when you start looking at the stakes of the day and the way that world worked, it was absurd. I mean, there was no rhyme or reason. There was no meritocracy. There was no way to win this game except to play it in as corrupt a fashion as everybody else was playing it. So Diane and Catherine I think it was that initial relationship that attracted me to it, that I think attracted Erwin as well, that this is what we first read about. There's so much goes on in Catherine's life, it's truly boggling. But you realize these two women who are in ways opposites, one person who's been empowered by the doors that opened for her because of men liking her, one woman who's been kicked around because, as the Pope decides men won't like her. They're in the same prison and they face the same limitations. And ultimately, in a way, I think Diane faces greater limitations than Catherine does. So those are some of the elements that, I suppose those are very specifically female limitations that were placed on these people. But the idea of an anti-hero by any means necessary beating a corrupt system, I think is universal to that kind of character.
Right. Now, Erwin, these actresses in these roles, they have to love, they have to be heartbroken, they have to scheme, they have to eventually torture, maybe even kill. Why were these actresses so perfect for these roles? And we can start with Samantha, who I've seen in other period pieces who was just fantastic, like Harlots.
Well, to start with Sam, I mean, she's Sam, I'm going to pretend you're not here for the moment. She's one of the greatest actresses, I think, of her generation. I have seen most of what she's done. I think she's an amazing actress. But additionally, she also came to the role with a particular understanding. In the first conversation we had, in the very first conversation that we had, we talked about the script and we talked sort of about the tone of the script. And Sam just endeared herself to us forever by saying, oh, it's Goodfellas in the Renaissance. And it was exactly, what we were looking for was exactly somebody who blew the doors off of what is thought to be period drama in that fashion. So that's sort of, I don't know how to be more clear than that. Liv came to it in a very different way because Liv auditioned for the role. And from day one, from the first audition, she was just who we wanted. And we knew that. I think it came as a surprise to Liv. Liv brought, again, just coincidentally, Sam and Liv come from similar parts of England. Liv sort of instinctively understood life as an outsider, and that was really clear. And what Liv projected was both a vulnerability and an intelligence that you could see would eventually grow into the Catherine that Samantha was going to play. It's funny, we got on the phone with Ludivine knowing we wanted her. So we had a really nice Zoom, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, I think it came as a surprise. We knew Ludivine's work, and I think it came as a surprise to Ludivine that we just at the end of the conversation said, great, would you do it? Again, Ludivine had all of the qualities and understanding of the character. Trying to think, I don't think that there was anybody else that we ever considered or talked about. Just as soon as her name popped up on a list, Justin and I said, yeah, that's who we want.
Well, it's a perfect group. Samantha and Liv, did you ever talk about Catherine de Medici together?
Yeah, we did. I'll let Liv speak in a minute, but yeah, it was really lovely actually, because it was, I was in New York filming the Darren Aronofsky film, The Whale, and I think Liv, you were in rehearsals, I think I was cast quite late. I think it's a while ago now, my head's like that. So we sadly couldn't get in a room, also because of COVID. We were making this show at the height of the pandemic as well. Everybody, the testing every day, the fear of all of that. So we had these Zooms where we were just able to talk about ourselves. I firstly have to say that I'm a huge Liv Hill fan. Liv knows this, but I'll just say this for the benefit of anybody else that's listening. Liv is extraordinary, and I believe she's one of the finest actors of her generation. I can't wait to see her in other stuff, and she's just my favorite. And I think, so for me, just to be able to get some time speaking to Liv Hill was great. And then, as Erwin said, we both come from a similar part of the UK, the Midlands, and neither of us have had the kind of acting training that maybe other British actors have had. And that's not a bad thing. It's just different. We come from a more naturalistic school of acting, I suppose, of finding the character from the inside out. And we had lots of discussions about first love and where we were from, and our voices and how we moved and walked. And then we talked about corsets and how that's going to affect things. And I'll let Liv talk a little bit more about voice coaching and things like that.
Yeah, everything you just said, and thank you so much, was still a bit overwhelming to hear. But I think for me, the biggest thing I took from all the conversations I had with Samantha, it was just the fact that she said, trust yourself, I trust you, I'm so happy you're cast. Because it was overwhelming, especially, the idea of being in such a big American production and then playing the younger Samantha Morton. It was quite overwhelming. But having that trust from her, from Erwin, from Justin, it let me feel relieved, and it made me, I didn't want to therefore do an imitation of Samantha. I just trusted in the casting process, and I think it really translates on screen. When I've watched it, I'm in awe of the way it's been edited, and just the fact it seems to move so seamlessly between Samantha, you and I, I can definitely see, I would never have thought it before we were cast together, but I can see so much similarities between both of us. So I'm really proud to have been a part of it and to have worked with these just such talented people.
And Liv, you learned some interesting things about Catherine de Medici, didn't you?
Me?
Yeah, about, things that were based on her life. Could you talk about that?
Yes, I mean, I didn't really, ignorantly, I wasn't very aware of Catherine de Medici before. So when I was offered, I did a lot of research and started to read the book, which I didn't manage to finish, but it was very dense with information. I suppose what I found really interesting was the fact that she inspired, apparently, the evil queen in Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the poison apple. And I think also, for those who don't even know of Catherine, going into the series, the Serpent Queen, it has connotations of evil, manipulation, corruption. And so what I think this show debunks is her notorious reputation, and it explores really cleverly how she might have obtained that infamous reputation. And I suppose that's what I learned about her. I learned that historical figures don't have to be detached and devoid of emotion. They were real people. And I think that's what the drama, what people will take from the drama.
Right. Well, Ludivine, as Catherine gets stronger, what happens to your character, Dan? Does she have to kind of up her game as well?
Well, I would say the road is quite bumpy at a certain point. Yes, because Catherine learns how to fight back. So the game is more and more difficult for Diane. And the biggest issue is that she's 20 years older than her. So Diane is obsessed with youth, maybe because she was married at the age of 14. So she never really had a youth of her own. So maybe she's obsessed with the idea of not becoming old, because it's also like it's an obstacle to her game, to her aims, and she finds a way to stay young. Well, it's a true fact, actually. I read that in her biography. She was ingesting gold, drops of gold, in order to glow from inside, and eventually it killed her many years after the moment we depict. But she got completely, she became a junkie. She became addicted to gold, and she started to lose a bit of her mind in this addiction, and to behave weirdly, and then to lose a few parties.
So, well, the using potions and spells and these maybe questionable medical practices, that's a part of the show. And, Samantha, can you talk about that as far as Catherine? She, it's said that she practices the dark arts and she has this cursed mirror. What about that? Was she really witchy and powerful in that way?
I think it's interesting, for certainly if we look at, what Ludivine was saying in regards to Diane, is that women in history, if we are midwives or we're herbalists or aromatherapists, or we look at the stars and, we listen to our hearts, or we have an opinion, you're vilified straight away. You're a witch, you're burnt at the stake for an opinion, or for having an instinct about something. And I think that for Catherine, and Justin, correct me if I'm wrong, I think that it's quite lonely being Catherine ultimately, isn't it? She can't trust anybody in this world. And so for me, what I was fascinated with playing was the relationship with the self. Catherine it's Catholic. There's something to be said for Catholicism, even if you know a lot of what is around you is bollocks and this is ridiculous or whatever, excuse my language swearing. But ultimately, this is a woman who has incredible insight and instinct and empathy, but she has to suppress a lot of that. And so it's all about listening to the inner self and the conflict with God. What is God? Who is God? And I don't know, Liv, you had some great scenes where, certainly, I don't want to give any spoilers away, but in the woods, and just Catherine's connection to nature, I found absolutely phenomenal. And her, she was a fierce horsewoman, better than all the men, and considering what they were wearing then, and, just her connection to animals and nature. And so I think that obviously, historically, Disney has used that in a great way. And, the Grimm fairy tales as well with Baba Yaga. And, we do this with women who are intelligent. We vilify them. But that's not to say that she doesn't do some pretty hardcore stuff in the show. I mean, come on, let's face it. She has to make some pretty incredible decisions. But then we look at men in history that make those decisions and are lauded upon. Churchill, Napoleon, Nelson. I mean, all these men that do these things. And then you look at, how if women do certain things, how we're just considered, unstable, mentally ill, hysterical. People are still a bit scared if they go to the hospital and they've got a female brain surgeon or a female pilot on a plane. It makes them quite uncomfortable. It's really weird,
Right. And you mentioned religion, which becomes a central theme as the show goes on, because that became it was very divisive in France at the time. So for the producers, did you use any historical consultants? What did you do to sort of closely adhere to this world that these characters are living in?
Well, I'll jump in, Justin. There's a thing in terms of doing historical shows, which is you do your reading, but at a certain point, you're doing a show and not giving a history lesson. So we used the book. We had unbelievably talented artists designing the show, both in our production designer and in our costume designer. They did their research, which meant that things were going to be that stuff was going to be historically accurate. But frankly, beyond that, you got to let it fly. And beyond that, you're dealing with real people. So past a certain point, research actually becomes your enemy.
Homes and castles are currency in this world. I'm curious if you shot at any of the actual locations. I mean, a lot of these homes were in dispute, and if you had a great castle, you had a great life. So did you actually go to any of the locations that
we shot literally in the hallways, rooms, and gardens that Catherine and Diane walked around it. We shot in one castle, Chenonceau. One garden is to this day known as Diane's garden. The other one to this day is known as Catherine's garden. And we literally shot in all of those places.
What was that like for you as actresses to realize you're walking in the same pathways as these characters that you're playing?
I think for me, being an actress that everything matters to me. I think I was a bit, annoying for some of the art department, because I'd arrive and I'd be like, those blankets, are they machine? Has the machine done that, or have they been hand sewn? Because, I'm all about the detail and my prep, I'm really into the prep, but it's also that I can just forget about it and then be in the moment and trust that everything tells its tale, and there's a truth, and everything that's on screen has a genuine reason to be there. It has a truth in itself. Robert Altman used to famously say that and talk about that, the scene within a scene, and what is essential within that. And then, so on a spiritual level, to be in those buildings, knowing that the real Catherine walked on those stones, that she possibly touched that piece of wall, but just that her energy still there, you know, you feel that, and you'd have to be rid of a cold person if you didn't feel that. I felt humbled and honored, and, you know, without sounding witchy myself, would just ask for some guidance and some kind of just center myself and just feel, okay, breathe and go, right, we're here now. This is it. This is the moment. And I don't know about for you, Ludivine, it felt phenomenal.
Yes, I wouldn't say I felt humble. Maybe the opposite feeling, actually. I was feeling like an exhilarating pride to be in those walls, maybe because it's my own history, it's my own country. I think that throughout the centuries, all these women have been depicted with a male gaze, and suddenly being there in their castles, galloping on a horse, side saddle in the middle of the Chateau de Chambord. For me, it was like the biggest homage I could give to Diane, because suddenly it was putting her back to the place she deserved to be.
Well, Diane also, all of them have striking costumes. I mean, the costumes are incredible. Diane wears the signature black and white in every scene. So did that help you connect with her as well? Well,
I think it helped us all, because the costumes were in itself, every costume was a story in itself. The work that Karen Müller-Ferraud has done with us was incredible, and of course it would tell a lot of it would narrate the feelings that our character were going through. There's a line of Diane when she says that she only wears black and white because it's mixed feelings that she's expressing, and this idea of duality between black and white was always present in me, because Diane is always supposed to be the villain, but she's also a very wounded lady who's very sensitive and who deserves to be loved and respected. So this duality of colors reminded me all of this.
Liv, what about you? You know, in the first episode, we see Catherine trying so hard to get the right outfit to arrive at the French court. And when she does look a little silly, we have to admit. Can you talk about maybe a costume that really spoke to you?
I think one thing that really stands out about this series are the magnificent costumes. For me, I guess each dress gave me a bit of a different power stance, especially the corset. I mean, corsets were sort of made to restrict women, I suppose, so it did feel very restrictive, but it also gave me that power stance. I put my shoulders back, I lifted my head, and I think it really gave me, as Catherine, that strength that she needed, the power and just stoicness when she was in a very vulnerable position. I think one of my favorite costumes is the one that you just described, is when she comes out in this golden egg to meet the French court, and she's got white face and eyelashes, and the hair is, I just thought it was so clever of Karen, because it's just so shocking but also gorgeous at the same time. Again, it's like Ludivine said, there's that duality where you're sort of in awe but also a bit really, and I absolutely loved playing with that. And there was these massive high heels as well, because she was the first person apparently who brought high heels into France. So, well, it was just such a pleasure.
Well, Samantha, she also apparently changed the mourning colors from white to black, and you wear a lot of black in the show. And in the trailer, those massive sleeves, that huge black dress, she is taking up her space. So talk about how the costumes, and maybe a moment that that you remember from shooting where you just felt all powerful like that.
Well, I think that it's a shame that Karen's not on this this conversation that we're having together, because Karen really is the best costume designer I've ever worked with. The attention to detail and the individuality with which she occupies her space is like no other. She works very, very instinctively, very intuitively with fabrics, with your skin tone, looking at the locations. And obviously she has to contrast all of these different characters, all the women of the court, Ludivine's character. We all have to have our own space. And likewise with Mary, Queen of Scots. I think, I don't want to give away any spoilers, but she's just extraordinary in her interpretation of this world, and bringing a new spin on it, because I think this period's been done many, many times and people have done it brilliantly. So how do you get someone to make it their own? Well, she has, and she's done it exceptionally well. Wearing the black dresses was, I think, again, another challenge for Karen. How do you put a character in the same black outfit nearly all the time, but yet it's different? Yet it allows me to perform differently, because each one has a different texture or a different fabric or something underneath it. There are layers. I was asked a question today about how do you get into character? Is it the clothes? Do the clothes get you into character? And I say actually no, because you have to play the character whether you're naked giving birth or in a nightdress. So I always have to find the person within, regardless of what they're wearing. However, there is something to be said for putting those clothes on. They do transform you, and you are immediately, I'm like, oh, she's back in the room. Okay, there we go, I'm back in, you know what I mean? And I think that's, also kind of and Justin, you can correct me if again I've got this wrong, but her choice to wear black in mourning when everyone else has worn white, there was a reference to the fact that historically, many, many moons ago, women did wear black, and she was bringing it back. She was saying, no, I have no reason for joy. I don't want to express my joy. I'm not pure. I'm not getting, if you think about the bride of Christ, you think about taking your first Holy Communion. That's what we associate with white as well. And I think that every color has significance. When I played Mary, Queen of Scots, she famously, when she was beheaded, she wore red, the color of being a martyr. Here, this black it felt like it gave me power, and it felt like it enabled me to hide in the shadows. So people didn't really know what Catherine was thinking and feeling at any one time, that she was unreadable. But was she readable? What do we know? So I'm incredibly proud, and oh gosh, I just get so excited talking about the black dresses and Karen.
Well, it's important to note that this show is really just visually stunning, as well as the storytelling being really fascinating. It is a feast for the eyes. I mean, it's wonderful to watch. I'd like to ask you a question that we have a City Card sponsor question, and it's, what do you think are the most rewarding and or damaging consequences for the characters who embody the belief that it is better to be feared than to be loved?
You might have to ask me that again. I'm a bit tired. Say that again.
If you are the characters in this story often decide it's better to be feared than to be loved in the end.
Well, that's what Catherine says, yeah.
Right.
Well, it's the truth, isn't it? It's absolutely the truth. If you're in court and everyone's about to chop your head off or getting you hung, drawn and quartered or poison you or whatever, you'd rather people be afraid of you than love you or want to be your friend, because anyone can betray you. That's what I think.
I mean, especially if you're not a strapping, Catherine came after Francois de Premier, who's, I think, 6'4", a kind of kick the door in kind of king. And suddenly Catherine has to figure out a different source of power, which I think is, it's really interesting, or I think it's interesting, that talking about these costumes and about the castles, it was all built as an act of presentation. It was all built stage managing an image to convince everybody these are the royals. And I think that Catherine very carefully managed her image. I think there's a reason she's called the Serpent Queen, and the stories about the magic mirror. How do you control a populace? You convince them you have a magic mirror in your room where you can see what they're doing. But in terms of the cost, I think Sam said it earlier, she's alone if people are afraid of you, right? It's a very lonely place to be.
And I'd love to hear just from each of the actresses, and then we'll wrap shortly, but is there a scene that you shot that really stood out for you, whether it was challenging? I mean, you know, we mentioned the side saddle scene, the golden egg scene, you know, there's so many interesting scenes. What stood out for you as being just super memorable to shoot? Liv, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, there were so many, but the one that always comes to mind first is actually quite a simply sweet scene. It's the first big scene between Henry and Catherine, where they're bonding over this little frog, and it's all very adorable. And it was also my audition scene, so maybe that's why I'm sentimental about it. But I think I remember really enjoying that scene because I felt so free, and it was the first time really that and maybe the last time that we see Catherine like safe, feeling like she has just secured a place in the French court as betrothed to Henry. And so to play with Alex as just two teenagers, I mean, her brain has literally not formed yet. She is a young girl full of teenage angst and insecurity and wanting to be loved and to love in return. And that scene was quite beautiful to film. And also I loved watching it as well, which is always a bonus.
Samantha, do you have a scene that stands out for you?
I think it's quite interesting because watching the show and being in the show obviously are quite different things. You have memories of the day and what's happening on the day. And, you know, as we all know, and people that are watching, filmmaking can be some days very simple, very just clean, everything goes smoothly. And then other days, the powers that be are somehow against you. The weather might be not what you need or want. There might be 40 aeroplanes going overhead and you've got the big speech or something. So it's quite tricky sometimes. But actually the scene that I remember the most, it's not in the show. It never made the cut. And it was, what I loved about the show was for me, the challenge of being an actor was the breaking the fourth wall and why that was there. And was it authentic? And, you know, not just using it as a clever trick, but this inner dialogue that Catherine was having. So there's part of the scene is in the show. And I don't want to give away any spoilers, but it's, I'm going to say this, Justin will know what I'm talking about and Erwin will, but it's a day in a carriage and I'm with my son and we're going somewhere and he's with his wife. And it was just so many elements were going wrong. The carriage, the noise, the gravel, I'm a non-smoker, and with the sun, there was like a crew member was smoking like miles away, but the wind was bringing it into my eye was streaming. You know, when you get the sun in your eyes and your eyes stream, or someone gets cigarette smoke, and I was like, oh, and I had this incredibly important piece to camera. And it was really tricky. And Justin was being very patient with me. And I thought, I'm not going to find it. I'm not going to be able to do it. And then somehow or another, it was there. And I found it. And I just went home and I went, yeah, you still got it, Sam. You can still do it. Because it's really hard being an actor sometimes and still making it always truthful and always like not feeling like you're acting. So yeah, but it didn't make it in the show. But I know that it happened and I'm very proud of that day.
What about you, Ludivine? Is there a scene that stands out for you?
We'll get it to you as a souvenir.
Yeah. No. The blooper reels. Yeah. Thank you.
One of my greatest pleasure on that show was all the scenes with Catherine, because it was, for me, it was kind of a couple. It was so intense. There was so many stakes in every scene because they was so well written and so complex. So I would say that the first one is, I am talking chronologically, is the one with Liv, where she throws the letters to the fire, and that suddenly Diane shows a bit of compassion to her, and there's it shows like a possibility of hope that their relationship evolves in a better way. And the second one was with Sam. Much later in the story, I remember I was so impressed to work with Sam, even after so many scenes. It was I had to come in the room without being announced, and I felt like I was a boxer who was coming on the ring, and I had to box with her, but with the subtlety of someone who makes duels. So it's a scene where
it's when you said we might have been friends.
We might have been friends. When you and I, we have so much in common, except. I had so much pleasure working with Sam, because it was so subtle all the time, so clever, so precise, and I love precision. And yeah, that was.
I have to say, for me, that day that Ludivine is talking about was actually one of the most special days on the show, because they were both just amazing. I mean, just amazing. And then at the end of this incredible match of wills, when the camera stopped rolling, they hugged and kissed each other. It was just seeing two amazing artists at their height. It's the most memorable day I had on the show.
Yeah, there's so many subtle changes in the relationships as the story goes on. So, I mean, I will close. Justin, do you think the viewers will have compassion for Catherine despite her actions? Will they root for her?
I think they absolutely will. And I think they will in the way they root for Michael Corleone or Walter White or Tony Soprano, because it's both the depth of the people playing Catherine, which I think is a huge amount to do with it. They're incapable of making actions seem simplistic, but also the circumstances that you see all these women in, the confines that everybody in this world has to deal with. You empathize with those constrictions. You emphasize, I think everybody, no matter who you are, empathizes with the idea of being underestimated and being shoved in the back, pushed down. And I think the wish fulfillment is, if you've got the goods, you've got the intelligence, you've got the skill to do what it takes to get past those people. And then I think what's also very sympathetic is, what does that cost you? That's the open question. And there's a point later on, not to give it away, but when Samantha says it feels good to be bad, doesn't it? And it's such a seduction. And there's a lot of seduction in the show between men and men and men and women and women and women and Samantha in the audience, and Liv in the audience. So that's what I think. I find everybody deeply sympathetic, dealing with this mad, insane, absurd world they're born into.
Well, it is a great piece of work, and I encourage everybody to watch all the episodes, because I am just loving it. So thank you for joining us for this special PaleyFest Fall TV Previews conversation with the wonderful cast and creative team of The Serpent Queen. And thanks once again to City for their support. You can enjoy more of these programs by clicking the subscribe button below. Thank you, and take care.